Good afternoon. My name is Sarai Cook, and I'm here with Dr. Gina Perez-Barron, and we're here talking about the mission of the National Trauma Awareness Initiative. I am currently leading the National Trauma Awareness Initiative, which we seek to bring awareness and raise awareness around the widespread uh, effects of trauma and the amount of people that are experiencing trauma and trauma responses and the effects of trauma in early childhood um, adverse experiences as well as early childhood trauma. We do that through providing trainings where we would like to see more entities, including state entities, federal entities, nonprofit organizations, and even businesses start to utilize trauma informed practices. We will be having many more of these conversations about trauma informed practices and trauma in general. This is our first sort of interview just talking about trauma. Uh, I'm going to go ahead and go into my story, but that's after Dr. Perez Barron introduces you. Go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your experience so that folks can understand. And then we'll go back and I'll start into my story.
All right. Thank you, Sarai. It's so exciting to be here. I am so honored to be on the advisory board for the kind of National Trauma Awareness Initiative. I'm really excited about your mission to help kind of agencies and organizations, especially those that serve folks who have been impacted by trauma and whose life choices and life experiences reflect that so that we can meet their needs in a way that helps us all move forward. In the end, I think that that's what we're all trying to do together. I'm a family practice physician with a special interest in addiction medicine. Attended Stanford kind of medical school, and from there went back to my home in New Mexico, where I developed the Alchemy kind of model, which is a trauma-informed, kind of culturally attuned approach to addiction. It worked. My patients got better, and I then came to Seattle, where I served as the kind of medical director for the Seattle Indian Health Board until kind of moving forward to the work I'm doing now. Was honored to be part of Gabor Kanamate's talks on trauma. He has a new documentary out that's been really powerful in terms of bringing the conversation to the forefront. And he has a special kind of sensitivity to how kind of Native communities have been impacted historically by trauma, and our hard work and our wisdom kind of getting on the other side of that. So that's who I am.
Thank you. So I think I'll start out just by saying why I founded the National Trauma Awareness Initiative really briefly. And then from there, I'll go into sort of the beginning of my own trauma. I think it's really important for me because I'm going to be asking people to come on to the YouTube channel and share their experiences. I'm not really going to require them to talk about their trauma, but I just wanted them to share their experiences in state agencies, in courtrooms, in jails and prisons, and doctors' offices about being re-traumatized, or how, what are some of the things that made them feel comfortable in those sort of environments. So I I founded the National Trauma Awareness Initiative because I I got licensed to practice law in 2013. So I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Oklahoma. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Washington. I looked back over the last year, I looked back on my career and some of my life choices and some of my career choices, and started to think, why did I make those choices? And it really wasn't clear to me. Yes, I feel that I did get a lot of good experience, but I also really wasn't stable in any job or any place. I moved, from Portland to Kansas City to Oklahoma to Washington D.C. back to Oklahoma. All these different places and these different jobs where they were very exciting and really great opportunities. Uh, I was just introspecting and not sure why I kept seeing the same problems that would arise, in every situation. So when I moved to Seattle, being an attorney, I moved to Seattle to work on criminal justice reform because, as I'll talk about in my story, I am formerly incarcerated. Uh, so that's always criminal justice reform has always been a passion to me. So I came to Seattle to work on criminal justice reform. And a part of doing that is on working on reform and policy is telling your own lived experience. So I had my first sort of trauma response, trauma reactivity when I went to the Washington State Legislature to um, to testify on a bill, and it was for the Clean Slate bill. I had to tell my story um, that I'm going to tell here today. And walking out of there, even in it, I was very nervous, of course. But after I left there, I would ruminate on it. I got depressed. I got anxiety. I thought I didn't do good enough, even though everyone said I did really well and they were very excited about my testimony. And several legislators came to me and said that they were very moved by my testimony. I still didn't think it was good enough. And it was a really huge source of negative feelings and emotions for a very long time, which then began to stack more negative feelings and emotions around sharing my story. Uh, and that all culminated into me getting a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis is a common diagnosis for people that have trauma and early childhood trauma. We do end up with post-traumatic stress disorder sort of characteristics or things that we do, and also was really depressed and was just life got really hard because I just continually having to tell my story and then having to hear the story of others that I was representing and hear their struggles within the criminal justice system, hearing how they weren't being treated right was hard for me. And I would listen to an hour of somebody talking about their struggles in the criminal justice system, and then I would have to go lay down for 2 or 3 hours because of the response I was having.
So, Sarai, can I ask you a question? When all this was happening, did you have a sense that you had had a story of trauma, that you had had kind of traumatic things happen in your younger years?
I've always known that I have, but I didn't put those experiences and trauma together. And I didn't know a ton about trauma until, the last year and a half. And then, well, here's sort of how I learned about trauma and trauma informed practices. So I grew up I'm from the Muskogee Nation. I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Nation in Oklahoma. I grew up going to Indian Health Services for my health services. I never wanted to go anywhere else. So I even had, worked for the federal government and other places that had wonderful insurance. Never utilized them. Always wanted to go to Indian Health Services, and I didn't know why. Well, people can say what they want about Indian Health Services, and I know a lot of people have a lot to say, and I'm sure they're rightly so. But I didn't. I loved Indian Health Services. I never wanted to go anywhere else, and I had no idea why. So when I moved to Seattle, I started going to Kaiser Permanente. Um, I was like, why are they treating me so well? Like, why do I not feel uncomfortable? Why do I feel listened to? Why do I feel heard? Why do I feel like they're doing what I'm asking them to do? I'm telling them this is my body, this is how I feel, and they're running the tests that I want them to run, and they're doing the things that I want them to do, and they're very transparent. Every appointment is documented. I can read what they wrote about me. Everything is so transparent. They're very kind, and I really did not understand why. And it was my first experience like this. So I started to ask around, and someone said, well, adverse childhood experiences, trauma informed care. And I was like, what's that? And then I started digging into that. And then that just kind of led me to learn more about adverse childhood experiences and how they are trauma informed. They do utilize trauma informed practices, which I personally believe that Indian Health Services has been using for a very, very long time before, you know, it, ever since I was what I can remember in my early 20s. Just feeling more comfortable there, feeling that they understood me. So that's sort of my journey into understanding that, and then taking the adverse childhood experiences test, which there's a test that has 10 questions, there's a test that has 13 questions, and it's the same test, but uh, finding out, that I have 9 of those adverse childhood experiences, and then like kind of linking that to some of the, being incarcerated and a lot of the things that I went through, because there was and there is a lot of shame around being incarcerated. There was and is a lot of shame around being an alcoholic. There was and is a lot of shame about having post traumatic stress disorder and, depression. But learning that I have a very significantly higher adverse childhood amount of adverse childhood experiences than the general population, which which I guess the majority of the population, I would say, has 1 or 2 or 3, has less than 4, and then it's a lot less of a minority that has 4 or more. Um, and so just learning that and like kind of learning why that was really is helping me with that shame. I still have it, but I am sitting here willing to tell my story and willing to tell it to whoever I need to tell it to, and hopefully it'll help people and help them understand more about trauma and trauma responses. Um, so that's how I came to that, and in the grand scheme of things, it is pretty recent that I know about adverse childhood experiences and trauma, and I did not know for a very long time. And I didn't know why I did the things I did. I didn't know why I felt the way I felt. I didn't know why I had anger and rage and depressed and anxiety all the time. I didn't know. I just thought maybe I was a bad person, or I couldn't control my anger, or
So common. It's so common. Yeah, yeah. That's how all of us accommodate. Right. Right. What we learn as children, we believe to be how things are, and it really takes into adulthood to take a look back, um, and then give ourselves permission to learn how to decide how maybe we want things to be instead. Yeah.
right. And it's a lot. It is a lot with like building identity and like attaching identity to certain behaviors, and then saying, well, that's just how I am. I'm an angry person, or I'm a sad person, or I'm an argumentative person. Instead of kind of looking at the physiology behind it and looking at what's happening in my brain and what's happening in my body and what I felt like I had to do to survive. And just based on the signals that were going on in my brain and body, learning about all of those things gives me more of a choice.
Mm.
Okay, that's not necessarily me.
Yeah. Let's get back to your story.
Yeah, okay, great. So, just to start out, I'll start out with my early years. And then when I finish there, maybe we can talk about like attachment and the trauma and sort of how that sets up, how that set up the rest of my life. So, first off, I'll say again, I am a citizen of the Muskogee Nation. I am a descendant of a young boy that crossed crossed walking on the Trail of Tears, the removal of um, our people, Muskogee people, from our ancestral homelands that were located in Georgia and Alabama, and we were removed to Oklahoma. So I'm a descendant, and that trauma from that removal from our ancestral homelands lives within me. Um, So I'll start out by saying that. I'm also, um, my father was in Vietnam, and my mom is a survivor of a lot of abuse and also the foster care system and, addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions. And that's before I was born, that those things happen. So I was born into um, an already a situation where there was a lot of drugs and alcohol, there was violence, there was domestic violence, there was my mom not having the ability to take care of me at a lot of times. When I was about 9 months old, my mom, I think she hitchhiked with me to Oklahoma and left me at my dad's house because she needed help. And my dad gladly helped her, and I stayed there for a while. And she came and picked me up and took me to a foster home. I stayed at that foster home until I was 3 years old. In that foster home, I was abused in various ways, and that abuse state. Some of my earliest memories are the abuses that occurred in that foster home. Um, and then I was picked up by a woman, and she, I still remember her face when she picked me up, and now I kind of remember as an angel, that picking me up. I remember her opening the door, and I saw her face, and she was someone that I knew, um, and I went with her gladly and lived with her until I was about 9 years old, and went back and forth between her and my mother. And then, around 7, my mom got sober. She joined the program, a recovery program, and got sober. But when you get sober, you still have all your underlying character defects and all your underlying flaws and all the reasons why you use drugs and alcohol to survive. You still have all those, and you still work. It's a lifelong process to work through those, and I know that because I'm working through my own. Um, but when she got sober, or I guess I was about 9 years old, I had the choice to move to another country with the woman that I was living with, or move back with my mother. And I have actually recently spent a few weeks with the woman that raised me, for a long time. And she said she remembers the conversation distinctly. And that I said, if my mother's ever going to get better, she has to take care of me. She has to raise me. And she said that she knew when I said that I knew what I was talking about, and she trusted me, and let me go back with my mother. So I remember, during that time, uh, I I remember, having a decent relationship with my mom, and everything until about 12 years old, until about puberty. I started my period when I was 12 years old, and I then started also to act out really bad. I felt really alone. I felt disenchanted by the education system. I felt, um, I couldn't follow. I was smart, but I couldn't follow. Um, Sort of, I didn't want to go to school every day, and then I started skipping school, and I started smoking weed, and I started drinking. And then once I started to do those things, that's all I wanted to do, because I found an escape in marijuana. I found an escape in alcohol from my feelings, and there were some really hard feelings that I was going through at that time. Um, the first time I was incarcerated was at the age of 13. I was incarcerated for theft 3. And from that time on, I would just keep going back in and out of juvenile hall for a very long time, for fighting, theft, probation violations, running away, everything. So just go in for a month, go in for 2 months, get out for a few days, go back in, get out. Then I got into some more serious trouble and ended up going to a juvenile institution at 15. Stayed there for a year.
What do
Got out
you remember about that time?
uh, about at the juvenile institution.
Just more or less that whole time of kind of coming in and out of all of that. What was going on inside?
I think I felt safer inside. because
Because
when I got out, I didn't have a stable place to live. I would go to group homes, I would go to foster homes. I was not welcome at my mother's house during that time because I was getting in too much trouble, and I was, I wouldn't listen. I didn't want to listen. I got to a point where I did not care what anyone thought or said. I was ready to either fight with or argue with or whatever I had to do to have people not tell me anything. I didn't want to follow any rules. I got to a point, and I think a lot of it was that I was reprimanded so hard in school because I think I do have I at that time ADHD, ADD, a lot of getting up and sitting down, a lot of talking, a lot. My name was always on the board with multiple check marks. I was always in timeout. I was always getting sent to the principal's office. So I just got tired of it because it's like I was always being reprimanded, and I was trying to do the best that I could. I wanted to be that good child um that everybody wanted and everybody liked and respected and thought they were great. I wanted that so bad, but I couldn't do it.
right, right,
And back then, I don't know if there were any EAP programs, to like modify the education system, which I think that really would have helped me.
yeah,
But they didn't have any of that stuff back then. It's like
yeah,
you do it this way. If you don't do it that way, then you're bad.
yep, yep,
Do it this way, you're good. And I was bad, and I didn't think I was bad. I was trying not to be bad, but everything that I would do was bad. So I just got to the point where I didn't care what anyone said. I'm like, you guys are all messed up because you're not treating me right. And so then I just once I hit that point, I did not care. And so yeah, then I was on the streets, and it was safer incarcerated as a 13-year-old girl, 14-year-old girl, 15-year-old girl. It was safer to be locked up than it was on the streets. And so I just remember going in and out and being locked in my cell a lot, being isolated and locked in my cell a lot. When you first go in, you have to stay at least 24 hours by yourself, sometimes 48 hours by yourself. If you get in a fight, you might be in by yourself for a week. If you, I remember one time being in solitary confinement in the juvenile institution for 2 months, and I was 15 years old.
wow,
And I, just to be, totally transparent, that was my first spiritual experience. Being in solitary confinement for 2 months in the Tudor Cottage of Echo Glen institution for youth, because I I couldn't read anymore. I couldn't think anymore. I was just like locked in a room, and I just cried out, and I was like, "Please, God, help me." And just felt like a calming come over me, and was able to finally sleep, and made it through that time. But it was a really rough time, and it did not deter me from anything. It did none of it deterred me because I
you
kept
weren't
doing
done
it.
yet. You weren't done yet.
Well, I just felt safer being locked up, and I was safer being locked up, honestly, because in group homes and foster homes, those aren't good places. They're not. The streets are not a good place for a young girl. So if I think back on it, I wish there was a safe place for youth to go that can't be at home and aren't making it in society. That's not incarceration, but at that time, the only places were group homes and foster homes, and that wasn't livable for me either. Um, and that's just because of, I think it was a lot of the personalities. And at that time, I had done a big I had done a big, I don't care about what anybody thinks. I kind of hit that limit, that wall.
Yeah.
So it was a rough time. And when I got out, excuse me, I went to the Santa Fe Indian School. I really tried. I hadn't gone to school since seventh grade, besides in juvie. I really tried. I had a 3.8 GPA when they kicked me out. And so I was, on paper doing a really good job. But I was also smoking weed behind the cafeteria. I was also sneaking out of the dorms. I was also jumping over the fences to go drink. But then I was also doing really well in my classes and getting all my assignments done.
Yeah.
Um, and that's with not having gone attended any educational classes in the mainstream education system other than incarceration. Within incarceration, which you don't really attend classes. It's just to get out of your cell.
Yep.
So I got kicked out of there, and then shortly after that, just on the streets again, I I was shot twice um, with a 45 caliber gun. Um, I was shot in my abdomen. I was shot in my back. I spun around. I was sitting down when I heard the shot. I stood up, so it shot. I got shot in my abdomen. If I would have kept sitting down, I may have gotten shot in my face. I still think about that sometimes.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
it spun me around, and then another bullet went in my back. Um, so it's been till recently actually that I can say that I was shot twice and not cry. I really don't talk about it a
Yeah.
lot, but when I am asked about it and I have to talk about it, I cry, and I'm not crying right now. So that's great. That's growth for me.
Progress. There you go.
Yeah.
Growth. Wow.
After that happened, I was, shipped off to a lot of different treatment centers, and was never able to complete those. Uh, Ended up, um, you know, homeless, and started to sell drugs on the streets to basically to survive, and ended up also becoming a teen mother at 17, um, and continued to sell drugs until I was about 24 years old when I was incarcerated in prison, Coffee Creek Women's Prison. Um, I don't know. I kind of feel like, it's not that I feel bad, or it's not that I don't feel bad for selling drugs. I didn't at the time. And I'll tell you when I started to understand that it wasn't the right thing to do. And I'll talk about that during my incarceration. But for someone like me that is a teenager and a woman, there aren't many choices on the streets.
You're a
You can
survivor. Yeah.
you can be sex trafficked, or you can be a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Those are pretty much your choices.
Yeah.
That's not an excuse, and I'm not trying to make an excuse. Um, so going and being incarcerated at the age of 24, um, I remember going in, and I was in maximum security, and I got sentenced to 5 years in prison. And when I went in, they did a drug and alcohol assessment, and I didn't know why they were doing that. Well, I was supposed to be able to go to boot camp after 3 years. They implemented a new early release program when I first got in there, and that was not written on my judgment and sentence about the new early release program. So I ended up getting out in a year, basically, and it was sort of an accident. But it was because I was doing so well in there. I was a welder. I worked in the commissary. I went to programming every night. I went to recovery meetings. I went to sweat lodge. I learned how to type really well. All I could think about when I was in there is, what am I going to do when I get out of here? I have no skills. I have no education. I have nothing. What am I going to do? How am I going to raise my daughter? How am I going to? Because up until that time, I was raising my daughter. She was actually there when I got arrested. Um, so that time being incarcerated, while I used to say I actually looked fondly at that time, um, I guess it's looked at. I think a lot of incarcerated people, if they're in a place that has a lot of programming and they're not in there for too long, it sometimes it does save people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
But why is that the only option to save people's lives? Why didn't I have those resources before? Why didn't I have low income housing before? Why didn't I have all those resources and educational resources before I went in there? Um, and this was 2004, a very long time ago, and I think there are more resources now, but there still aren't enough resources. Up until this point, you heard everything that I went through. Never any trauma therapy. Never really need therapy. Super unaware. I was super unaware. I didn't know a lot of things. I didn't understand a lot of things. I wasn't taught a lot of things as far as about life and how to live life and how to be successful, and all these things that to consider as far as achieving goals. And the one thing the most impactful thing about being incarcerated uh, was I took a cognitive behavioral therapy class. This class taught me that everything that I think is not true. Up until that point in my life, I believed everything that I thought. I believed everything that came into my head. I believed it. I didn't question it. I would act upon it, and people would call me, I can't forget the word, um, not reactive, but impulsive. They would call me impulsive. Well, yeah, whatever would come in my head, I would do it. And I didn't know any better to think about it. So I was impulsive, but I didn't know any other way to be. Um, so just sort of being in there and reading a lot and learning about cognitive behavioral therapy, learning how to think differently, learning that there are resources out there for me, learning more about recovery programs, learning more about culture. Not even my culture, because my culture is a lot different than the ones I learned about in there, but just culture in general and having a sense of belonging. Um, so that was the most impactful thing, about my period of incarceration, which was 1 year. Um, and it really changed my life. Just that one realization. So, I was terrified of getting out. I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that the time had come that I could no longer sell drugs. Because if I got caught again, it would be 10 years, 20 years. I don't know how many years. Um, it just wasn't an option for me anymore.
And you had
Uh,
your daughter.
yeah. And I missed her.
Yeah.
I missed her. And that I realized how important that relationship. I guess I took it for granted. That relationship with my daughter, and just being in there made me realize so many things. Um, so when I got out, I I got two jobs, um, and one of those jobs was at Central City Concern Workforce Development, and I had never had an office job, and that office job was amazing. It was excellent. And I thought, yeah, office jobs are for me. Um, and then I went to Portland Community College, um, did really well, graduated with an associate's degree of science, general studies in 2006. Uh, Went to, and I remember, that was rough. I started at math 20. The people, math 10 is the lowest, math 20 is second to lowest. Math 20 is it's like fourth grade. I think I tested at fourth grade math level.
Wow. Yep.
I remember crying. I remember going to the tutoring center and just crying all the time, saying I wasn't going to be able to do it because I knew that I had to get to at least college level math to graduate, and really persevering through that time, and taking math every single semester for 2 years until I got to calculus. Yeah, failed calculus twice. And I was like, okay, well, I want to be an engineer. I didn't know why I wanted to be an engineer. I was like, oh, that sounds like it'll make me enough money. uh, Still not knowing myself, not knowing my own personality, not knowing my likes and dislikes. Just thinking about, oh, maybe this will make me enough money to survive. That's all I ever thought about. Basically, most of my life. Will this make me enough money to survive? Will this make me enough money to support myself?
Yep.
Um, So, graduated from there. Um, and then I remember I was trying to figure out what I would do next, like what degree I would get next, because education for me was a way out. Education for me was the only way out that I saw. It was also money to survive on, student loans, student aid, still eligible for food stamps, still eligible for medical, being in school and being a single mother. Um, I at the time also I had low income housing. I was in low income housing. Saved my life. Medical saved my life. Food stamps saved my life. Education system saved my life. And without those things, I would have sold drugs again, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, Even though at that time I realized that it was wrong. I never thought it was wrong. I thought, oh, it's a victimless crime. No, it's not a victimless crime. Every single woman that I was locked up with had a substance use disorder. We're in there, if not directly for drugs, because of drugs in some way, drugs or alcohol in some way. Every single woman in there. Um, Women are in there because of they're using drugs and alcohol, and they do other things to continue to use drugs and alcohol. And I will stand by that statement. And I was a part of that. I was a part of that by selling drugs to people. I was a part of like keeping that misery alive, and that's not something that I want to be a part of, or I've had wanted to be a part of since that time. Um, Addiction is a really tough one. Um, was continually during my educational time. I did stay sober for about 6 months when I got out, but it was rough. I was dealing with all these different things, and I started drinking again. And I've always been an alcoholic. I've been an alcoholic since I was about 13 years old. I drink to get drunk. I drink to black out. I drink to not feel. I drink to deal with the symptoms of my trauma. And that's what I did. And I felt really bad about it, but I could not stop. Um, and so I remember the day I was looking for what else I could do, where my educational path could take me. And I looked at business, and I found the University of Portland. The University of Portland is a very expensive private school in Portland, Oregon. Um, I remember having to lay down that day. I saw the program I wanted. I wanted to be an entrepreneur scholar. Um, I looked at the price. It was $50,000 a year to go to that school. And I read the description of the Entrepreneur Scholars Program. You go to New York, you go to China, you develop a business plan, a marketing plan, you shop it around. And I wanted that program so bad and all I could do is just go lay down. I got so overwhelmed, I just laid on my couch for like an hour. But it kept coming in my mind and coming in my mind. And I said, I'm just going to try. I'll just try.
Yeah.
And I did. And they accepted me. And there's a woman that's a professor there. She read my story, and I didn't talk about my criminal history. I just talked about being a single mom and a teen mom. But so nobody knew about my criminal history there, and that I had basically just got out of prison. But I remember she called me to her office, and she said, we'd really like to have you in our program. I said, I really like to be in your program, but I can't afford it. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Right.
So she said, well, how would this amount of money help you? Would this make it doable? And I said, and she offered me a scholarship. And I said, yeah, I think it would. And so I was able to go to that school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Life-changing.
Yeah, it was. So, what I know is that if I want to do something and I try to do it, some people will come into my life to help me. Something will come, some kind of understanding or knowledge will come and help me to achieve my goals that I want to achieve and go where I want to go. I think it's just the fear that has, held me back a lot. But when I sincerely give it my all and try, then something will happen to let it happen.
Yeah.
So, I went to that school. I had a lot of problems there. I had a lot of social problems there. And it was all in my own mind. It wasn't everybody else, it was me. And that's because
Imposter?
well, They were very rich, privileged kids, 18 to 22 kids, that their parents paid their full tuition. Their parents gave them money to live. They had elitist, attitudes and behaviors and the way that they would talk, and it offended me.
Right.
And so I was continually walking around offended all the time. And me being who I am, I would say it, and I would argue with people in class, and I would say, that's crazy. And they're just talking about their experience and like what their parents have told them. And, with the understanding that I have now, I understand that. But with the understanding I had back then, I didn't get it.
Right.
So I was just offended that they thought like that.
Right.
So it was rough. Even to this day, I don't have any friends from that period of time. I was there 2 years. I got my bachelor's degree. From there, I did attend the Entrepreneur Scholars, got a certificate in entrepreneurship, did go to China, did go to New York, shopped my business plan around, did, really well and with that program. Um, but even in China, I was having problems with people there. Not with the Chinese people, they're awesome, but with my cohort, and just feeling left out and all these feelings of, you know, just feeling a lot of left out. And it
A lot
was
of
really rough.
isolation.
Yeah, I was very isolated that whole time, which just led me to drink, go out in China and drink. Um, but I made it through. I made it through that experience. I made it through that school. I definitely got a higher level of education. I got a really great education there. And one thing that it also did for me was expose me to these people that think so much different than I am. Because then when I went to law school, it was more of the same
Right.
types of people, more of the same people that are raised by doctors, lawyers, judges, politicians, and that don't know anything about the struggle, a struggling life, or being a single parent, being a teen parent, being having adverse childhood experiences. Don't know a single thing about any of those things. Gun violence, incarceration, the things I had experienced. Nothing about that. So from their position of privilege, they act the way that they act, and they think it's normal. And it wasn't normal for me. It was actually very hurtful to me. And it was but I had already been beat down by that other school and overcame and got through it. So that experience showed me. And if I would have went to any other state school, I wouldn't have had that experience, because I would have surrounded myself with people that were like me. But at
Right.
that school, there was no one like me,
Right.
no one. So you know, I had to interact with the people there. And so when I went to law school, I was grateful to have that experience, because I had to interact with them too. While there were more people there that I could, surround myself that were like-minded. But, in my section, I just had to interact with a lot of people that triggered me. I would say they really brought out strong emotions in you, because that privilege brings out strong emotions in me. That feeling of not being understood, or not being around people that have similar life experiences I do, and have a complete different life experience, is really rough. It's really rough. I was able to surround myself with people of color there.
Yeah.
I was a member of the Black Law Society. I was a member of the Asian Law Society. Every kind of society. I started the Native American Law Society, but it was just me, so I had to team up with everybody. And I felt there that I was around people that understood me, and I understood them, even if they didn't have a lot of trauma. Um, uh, but I still had to interact, and that's all through the legal profession. That's built into the legal profession. Now it's in the court systems. It is the legal profession, that sense of entitlement, that sense of I'm better than you, everybody, that sense of keeping people out, that sense of keeping people not sharing information. Nobody at that school wanted to have anything to do with me. It seemed like until they knew I had a job after 1L year. So like getting a job after 1L year is, is pretty good to have that. They're like, oh, how did you get that job? Oh, da, da, da. They didn't want to talk to me any other time, but when they saw that I was in a position that they'd like to be in, okay, now we're gonna have a conversation, stuff like that, which I didn't appreciate. Um, so got through that experience, graduated from there. During that time, I had been interning for my tribe. Uh, I had been interning for the Pre-Law Summer Institute that I went to prior to law school, which I'm very thankful for that. And it's a native program. It's a really good network to have. So I just went straight in into back to or went to Oklahoma and started working for my tribe. Um, I say like, my alcohol use, got in the way of a lot of things there, and a lot of good that I could have done. I did the best that I could, and I did work as the director of community research and development, where I developed training and technical assistance programs for 25 chartered Indian communities, which is one of the most profound experiences of my life. Working with the grassroots tribal communities, and they're just trying to build up their communities and provide economic development opportunities in really rural places in Oklahoma. I mean, I live in Seattle now. We have a great transportation system. We have all kinds of resources here in Seattle. There's none of that in Oklahoma. There's no buses. If you don't have a car, you're not going anywhere. If you don't have anything, if you don't have a house, you're living in a tent. It's people help their family members a lot there. And the tribe does have some resources, but it's very, very poor. There's not a lot of resources. There's not a lot of recovery resources. Um, I think the closest treatment program I know of, as far as alcohol and drug treatment, is in Ada, Oklahoma, which is pretty far away. There's just not a lot of resources.
Yeah.
So I was there, and I was in that job, and I was utilizing alcohol uh, to help me with my, the trauma responses that I was having. And yeah, it was beautiful, and it was profound, and it was amazing. And it was also rough too, continually being triggered and having to deal with that. Um, I also worked with tribal college. I taught tribal court systems, and I taught Indian land issues. That was a really great experience. I ended up I left there and I went to work for the United States Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. Uh, there, it was back to, a lot of racism, a lot of tokenism in the federal government in Washington, D.C. Very triggering, very rough. You walk in, only native in the room, and they're looking to you to answer for all of Indian country. Good experience, traveled all around the country, worked with a lot of tribes, did a lot of energy development. But also, being in Washington, D.C., I'm speaking honestly, was not somewhere I want to be and not the experience I want to have. I'm glad I had it, but it's not something I would want long term, just because it's a lot of just being tokenized.
Yeah.
It's a lot of wanting them to answer for Indian country when I have no right to answer for Indian country. Because I'm native, I should speak for Indian country. No. Yeah, so it was a lot of that same feeling, like everything I'm describing, even from my childhood, of just not being happy, not liking where I'm at, not liking the experiences that I'm having, feeling either ostracized or tokenized, or feeling left out, and a lot of those feelings that I've always had.
Just not seen. Yeah, just not feeling seen.
Yeah. So, still in my active addiction, went back to Oklahoma, went to work for the Creek Nation, reintegration program and helped tribal members that were reentering from a period of incarceration. I always did have a passion for that, in the back of my mind, but it wasn't that I was sharing my story. I was representing them in court. And being in those court systems again, it just really bothered me how much it felt like they hated poor people. They would throw people in jail over $50. They will throw you in jail over $50 and disrupt your life. And a lot of times people don't even have a ride to court. If you live in the country, if you live in Wetumpka, Oklahoma, and you don't have a car, you're not getting to court. And you don't have $50. And if you did, you would pay your light bill.
Right. Right.
So just going in there and seeing those judges, elderly and just with their mentalities and them ostracizing my clients and my disabled clients at that, my traumatized clients. I've seen so many trauma responses from the people in my tribe going to their court hearings. They're scared, they're terrified, and having judges grill them and they're stuck in a fight or flight, can't answer. I try to talk further, and there's like, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to her. And then grilling them over $50, throwing their whole body off and their whole system off over $50. And, it just made me so angry. Just all the things that I witnessed during my time in the court systems in Oklahoma were just terrible, terrible. And then the legislature in Oklahoma even tried to help out, pass the law that made it so that people had 6 months to start paying on their fines and fees. And courts wouldn't even give them the 6 months. Court clerks won't give them the 6 months, wouldn't apprise them of their rights, would set their payments up right away. They didn't even have jobs or cars or a place to live, and then try to throw them back in jail when they couldn't pay and couldn't even get to the court. So I saw that it was just a system that people would get into, and they would just get in that system and stay in that system, and then just go back to prison, go back to jails, in and out of jails. You get hopeless, start to use drugs, can't see your kids, can't get your kids back, can't provide for your kids. And seeing all that it was very rough for me, because I've been in that system and I've seen that's been done to me.
There's a lot of money to be made in that system. You become a commodity, and there's more investment in actually being kept in it than in getting support out of it. Yeah, it's an industry.
And it's hurting children.
Yep.
And those children are growing up and just going right into that system as well. Yeah. It's hurting families, children, families, grandparents that are having to raise the children.
It becomes part of the intergenerational trauma. It becomes a machine to create it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm just going to say that I'm sober now. I'm proud to be sober, and I plan to be sober for the rest of my life. And I credit my sobriety to giving me the opportunity to understand my own trauma, to understand my own triggers, to live life in a more healthy and balanced way, to understand why I did the things I did, why I lived that life, how those experiences compounded through my life, and sort of. But even to this day, I hold that I'm highly attached to who I am, that I am formerly incarcerated. I don't know. One day, maybe I can let that go, and because it's a little bit of a weight. It is still a part of me, even though it happened almost 20 years ago. And I'm still getting over the shame of that. And I know mentally, I know theoretically, I know it out here that I should not be ashamed of it. But I don't know in here, in my heart. So, and I look back on my life and see a lot of the resilience too that I had and I had to have, and I'm just, I'm proud of myself. But I think, just within this uh, National Trauma Awareness Initiative, I didn't know I had the trauma that I had. I didn't know how that affected me. I didn't know that's being re-traumatized and how the system was re-traumatizing me. And just now learning about all these things, and I want other people to know if they're experiencing the same thing. It helps so much to know why. And then once you know why, then you can start to work on it. When you don't know and you're just going around blind to it, then things happen and you don't understand. When you become aware of it just changes your whole life. And I think it's amazing. And I think it's time for these entities that are serving people like me that are formerly incarcerated, are incarcerated, start to understand the science behind trauma, start to understand how their ways and the systems that they've built add to that experience of trauma, add to that misery and suffering of the people that are utilizing their services that they're being actually paid to provide by the government. Um, and start to implement trauma informed practices, start to implement ways to deal with people that are not constantly triggering them so that they can stay in you know in a good way to where they can communicate and they can say their needs and they can be all have a good experience out of it, and come out better, come out of the situation better. But if they're yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that your story is actually the perfect kind of blueprint to see both the impact, right? What goes into um, kind of creating that trauma, right? Right? The cultural components, the historical components, the intergenerational components that actually begin in childhood, right? And then how that sets us up for for our adulthood. Throughout the whole thing, you've been a survivor, you know, um, um, and that's the most important thing. That's what we have to do first is survive. None of us get to this place unless we do that first. And then it really is about, how do we take those experiences, um, understand them, learn from them, um, and so that then we can be here, which is to be of service, And I think in the videos ahead, being able to take a look at the story that you've just shared, and really kind of break that down, and be able to understand some of the forces at play, childhood development, again, cultural kind of genocide, what happened in the boarding schools, how we imprint our ancestors' experiences in our DNA, our epigenetic kind of memory, which is, as Native people, what we know as our blood memory, right? How we survive, how our thinking gets formed, and then really how, in order to come home again, we have to be able to step out of everything that we thought was true, um, and and look at it in a different way. In the end, it's all about attachment. It's all about connection. Um, we live in, frankly, in a traumatized world, and everyone, in my belief, um, we just have to look at what we're doing to Mother Earth, right? And we see that we don't actually know how to be five-fingered ones in a healthy way. With our environment and with each other, and most importantly, kind of with ourselves. And it's because we haven't been taught. Um, and what we're really talking about, and what I really think that kind of you're here to do, and you've got an excellent board um, kind of behind you to kind of do this, is really to raise that awareness. You had to find it on your own, and I think what all of us with high ACE scores, who have this lived experience. I know it's what I find my calling is. I just want it to be that little bit easier for the folks that come after. Um, and I think that's what you're doing kind of with NTAI. It's what you're doing with telling kind of your story. And I can't wait to break it down in the videos ahead so that we can start teaching some of the science and some of the psychology, some of the traditional kind of wisdom kind of behind, um, how you saved yourself and what brought you here today, what brought all of us here.
Yeah. So with that, I'm happy that I got a chance to tell you my story, and we're going to be doing further uh, talks like this on this channel. And so maybe we'll do them weekly or bi-weekly, but yeah. So I appreciate you coming on here today and listening to my story. And I look forward to working with you further.
Sarai, thank you so much for sharing. It's been a privilege.
Okay.
See you
Wonderful.
again.
See you soon.